All right, so it is 10:15, so I'm going to get started. Thank you everyone for showing up today. Like I said, this is my first DrupalCon session, probably the biggest audience that I've ever presented to, so I appreciate you coming out to hear me talk about accessibility testing. I am Jen Sanders. I'm from the University of Minnesota. If you want to reach out to me later, my Drupal.org username is calamityjen. You can also reach me at sandy365@umn.edu. And then if you would like to follow along, I do have the slide deck available in Google Slides at tinyurl.com/DrupalCon20-Gen. And if you prefer just a text format where it has the overall points of each slide, but not in a slide deck, I also have a Google Doc available at tinyurl.com/DrupalCon20-Gen-doc. And if neither of these work for you, please feel free to reach out to me with the information on the previous slide. I'm more than happy to try to get an alternate way for you to get this information. And then also, like I said, this is my first session. If you be kind of to give me some feedback, let me know how I did. I do have the feedback form available at tinyurl.com/DrupalCon20-Gen-feedback. And I really hope there was no one else who was trying to make tiny URLs who's named Jen, because I took all of them. I like to have shorter names for everybody. All right, so before we get started, I am Jen Sanders. And just for you, so you know, it will soon be Jen DeMosquita. Trying to get married during a pandemic is an interesting experience, so that'll be changing any day now. Thank you. So if you want to follow up with me, just be aware it's going to be changing at some point. So I'm a web developer at the University of Minnesota in the Office of Information Technology, and I work to perform maintenance development on our core Drupal platform. We support over 1,200 sites across Drupal 7 and Drupal 8. Primarily front end, specialize in Drupal and web accessibility. And I'm also the chair of the university's Accessibility Ambassador Program. And so we're a group of people from across the university who are really passionate about accessibility, promoting it in our spaces. And then we have monthly events where we talk about different topics. So for example, what makes good alt text, in-depth color contrast, things along those lines. So I've been in my role at the U for 5 years, and accessibility has been a really, really big part of my job since the beginning. So before we hop in, I'd like to give sort of a breakdown of what this presentation is and what it isn't, because just to make sure we're all on the same page. So what this presentation is about is overall with accessibility, how and what to test, developing your own accessibility strategy in terms of testing, things that you should be aware of, and then resources that you can use as you develop that strategy. Things that it's not about. This is not an introduction to accessibility. There are so many resources out there that are really good primers into the basics. We're not going over that today. This has more or less an assumption that you have a base level of knowledge, or at least more or less some of the concepts, and that you already think accessibility is important. Along with that, it's not going to be a checklist in terms of here's everything that you need to do to test your page. I'm not a fan of checklists when it comes to accessibility, and I will go into why later. It's also not going to be any sort of legal advice. I am not a lawyer. I cannot give you any sort of advice in that regard. It will not be any promotion of specific products or services, and it won't be a tutorial regarding specific tools or how to use them. It's going to be a little higher level and more conceptual, but hopefully it should be able to help you develop what you need to do in terms of accessibility testing. And then a brief disclaimer. Opinions expressed in this presentation are mine and mine alone, do not necessarily reflect the opinions of the University of Minnesota. I like my job, you know, want to make sure that I don't make them look bad. All right, so in this presentation, I'm going to break down 7 lessons in terms of what I've learned for accessibility testing and developing a strategy, and then have some resources at the end. So lesson 1 is automated testing is not enough. 2, yes, you need to use a screen reader. 3, you need to test in everything. 4, create a system that works for you. 5, share the work, share the load. 6, involve people with disabilities. 7, expect failure. And then 8, the resources. So let's hop right in. So lesson 1, automated testing is not enough. So this will include crawlers that do automated tests, weekly or nightly, or more in-browser tools like Wave or Axe. And these are great things that you should be using. I'm in no way saying that automated tests are bad. The thing is, they can only catch so much. They are scripted. They can only catch code. They can only catch things that are very black and white. Anything that has ambiguity or maybe is a bit more gray, it can't get. And so you should treat any sort of automated test as the first step. It'll point out areas of note, point out things that you should be aware of, but they should always be followed up with human confirmation. And another reason that automated tests really aren't the only thing you should be doing is there have been examples of people building websites where they intentionally have made it as inaccessible as possible, but it gets perfect scores and checkers. And I won't name out specific ones because I don't want to make those tests look bad, but it is possible. You can have a site that is broken in so many ways, but the checker can't catch it because it's all things that these testing tools just can't look at. So for some examples or things that you should be manually checking, make sure that your alt text is useful. Most of these tools, they can tell, is alt text present? It can't tell whether or not it is actually going to be good. So you could put a file name, you could put a random string or a hash, and an automated testing tool will probably say, yep, you've got alt text, awesome, and go on its merry way. But that doesn't actually help somebody that needs it. So with your alt text, make sure that it is informative of what users need to know about the image if it's not available for whatever reason. I always like to double check color contrast, especially if there are images or transparencies involved. With these automated tools, they will get the hex code of the foreground, which is the text, and then the background, and then do a comparison to get the contrast. Transparencies can mess with this a bit because basically that color value isn't 100% accurate. It is going to be adjusted based on the background behind it. So if you have a transparency that's on a white background, it will appear lighter. If it's on a dark background, it will appear darker. So the actual color that is displayed is not going to be something that the testing tool can find. And especially if you have a transparency over an image where there's differences in color variation, that can really mess with it as well. So what I like to do is I will take 3 color samples. So the lightest, the darkest, and then some sort of color in between, and check against all 3 of those. And then see, do all of these match? And if they do, I'm probably okay. But then also with images, contrast in images are important because the users need to be able to see what's in it. So if you have a logo or anything that the user actually needs to be able to make out, if the contrast is insufficient, they can't see it. But at the same time, the testing tool can't actually get the color of the images. So that's a good thing also you should be looking at. And also with color contrast on images, make sure that it's eye friendly. If it's straining your eyes, maybe adjust it. Just, you don't want anything that's going to cause your users discomfort to look at your page. Another thing to always look at is anything with keyboard navigation or behavior. These testing tools can't find them. They can't test to make sure that your keyboard navigation is in the right order. They can't test anything with your JavaScript or the behavior of the page. So a human will always need to look at that. And same goes for screen readers. It can't look at screen reader compatibility or how it works with a screen reader. And we'll go over that next. Also, make sure that any images that have text in them have that information available in another format. So whether it's on the page, it's in the alt text, but just that information is available in something beyond an image so that it is reachable by everyone. And lastly, use the testing tools to verify anything that's coming up repeatedly, so anything that's questionable. It's a really good way to look at, are there issues in our theme or our template? Is there an education issue where we're consistently seeing certain types of things are being done incorrectly? So that even if it's not something that's easily remedied just by looking at a test. It's something you can begin to narrow down what are common things that we need to be looking at overall. All right, lesson 2, and I'm guessing is probably the one that most people are excited about. Yes, you do need to use a screen reader. The first thing I want to point out here is that keyboard navigation and screen reader navigation are not the same thing. So to clarify, keyboard navigation is you use the tab key and the focus of the page will jump from interactable element to interactable element. Screen reader navigation is using the built-in navigation or controls within the screen reader to scan the entire contents of the page. And these behave differently. Sometimes they're about the same, but there's stuff where you can make it work for tabs, you can make it work for screen readers, but not work for the other. So for this reason, you have to test both. And that I see this time and time again where, oh yeah, I've tested the screen reader navigation. They've tested keyboard navigation. Keyboard navigation is fine. Screen reader is broken. So test in both, but also different screen readers will behave differently than each other, or even the same screen reader will behave differently in different browsers or different operating systems. So you really need to be testing in as many combinations as possible, as many screen readers as you can, as many browsers as you can, as many operating systems as you can. And that's going to give you a good idea of what are issues that are recurring across the board. Is a screen reader behaving oddly in some way? Is it reading this element differently? And you do actually need to use a screen reader. You can't tell how it's going to behave in a screen reader without actually testing it. I know that there's some tools out there that will try to mimic what a screen reader will do. It's just best to use the actual screen reader, see for yourself what is going to be read, and that's just going to save you a lot of time. So in terms of screen readers, there is a list here, and these slides will be available at the link. I will have these resources also at the end. So in terms of screen readers, I would highly recommend looking at the WebAIM Screen Reader Survey, which is in the resources at the end. It's an annual survey by WebAIM, which is a really well-respected accessibility organization. And they do a survey where they ask about screen reader usage, who's using it, which ones, what browsers. And so it gives a breakdown of what screen readers are the most used in what browsers. So the main 3 that you will see, and I would say at least try to test in these 3, are JAWS, NVDA, and Voiceover. So JAWS and NVDA are available for Windows. You can purchase JAWS. NVDA is free. JAWS, I'll say, it is a bit pricey. Last I checked, I believe it was $1,200 US for a full license that could go on 3 computers as long as you didn't use them simultaneously. And then a $250 license for 90 days. I will say it is one of the more commonly used screen readers. For a very long time, it was the #1. That's dropped a little bit. NVDA is, I believe, a couple tenths of a percentage point more popular now. So do what you can. I'd say it is important to test with it because it does have some different behavior than other screen readers. But NVDA is free. You can download it. Voiceover is pre-installed on all Macs. You can enable it by pressing Command F5. It'll pop up. That's also how you turn it off. And then for mobile devices, VoiceOver is also available on iOS and is pre-installed. And then TalkBack is pre-installed on Android. So again, do the best you can, as many as you can, and then learn to at least use them very basically. At the end, I have a list of cheat sheets on how to do some very simple commands for testing that I've really found valuable. But so what I will generally do is I have a Windows machine with JAWS and NVDA, and then I primarily work on a Mac. I'll pull up VoiceOver just as I'm working through things. And then also for those of you on Macs who just enabled VoiceOver and now don't know how to turn it off, if you press Control, it will stop VoiceOver from reading what's currently being read, and then press Command F5 once to turn it off. It can take a little bit of time to load. If you press it multiple times, you'll just keep turning it off and on. All right, so now I have a brief demo, and I apologize for this part. I want to do a demo for you with VoiceOver about why this testing is important. The only way that I've found to get you to be able to hear VoiceOver is if I disconnect my headset and have you all listen to my speakers on my laptop. So this is going to be not the most elegant solution, but it's the one that works. So I'm going to switch over. All right, can everyone hear me first off? Awesome. All right, so then I'm going to share my screen. All right, so everyone should see just a very basic site that I have set up that says DrupalCon test site. Can everyone see that? Awesome. All right, so now I'm going to turn on Voiceover, and it's going to be very loud and annoying until you get used to it. And it takes a couple seconds.
Link. Speaker notes. Banner. Google Chrome. Link dimmed. Content is empty. Chrome. Now in.
All right, so you should be able to hear that a little bit. I need to just adjust the tabs.
Now in. Welcome vertical line DrupalCon test site. Tab content shared. Google Chrome.
All right, so first what I'm going to do is do...
Skip to main content.
Yes, thank you. Is do tab navigation of this menu. I have two menus on the page, one that's nice and styled, and then one that is just a base menu. It doesn't have the same styling. It's the same links. The difference is one of them I have specifically made to not work with screen readers. The other one should work fine. So first, let's just do our tab navigation.
Visited. Link. DrupalCon tests. Visited. Link. Home. Link. Jen Sanders. Visited. Link. About us. Visited. Link. Where to find us.
All right, so as you can see and hear, if we do tab navigation, it is getting through all these menu items fine.
Visited. Link. Home. Link. Jen Sand. Visited. Link. Visited. Link. Where to find us.
All right, awesome. So
Linkable. Chrome has new window. Visit link. Visited. Visited.
we can get
Chrome has new.
We can activate them slowly.
About us. Link.
Okay.
Skip to.
So if we were just doing tab navigation,
Visited.
we would be done at this point.
Chrome has no.
Yes, thank you, Spreadsheet. We would say we're done, we're good, go on our merry way. Let's actually try using screen reader navigation now. So we're in the page, fine.
Banner. You are currently on a banner. In
We found the menu.
main menu. Empty navigation.
All right, did you hear that? It said empty navigation. So it's got to where the menu should be, but it says it's not finding anything. Let's see if it can get more information.
List 4 items.
So it skips over that menu entirely. So it finds the nav, but it can't find the items inside. So the reason that happened in this case is I added an attribute called ARIA hidden, which hides things from screen readers. And it's something you can do wrong very easily. And it's a common mistake for people who are just starting with ARIA. So if you were doing just tab navigation, just testing with your keyboard, you wouldn't know that was happening. So this is what's important to test with both. Now I have this menu here so you can see what it should sound like.
Visited. Link. Home. Link. Jen Sanders. Visited. Link. About us. Visited. Link. Where to. Visited.
So it should be able to go through
About us.
the individual links, read off what it is, and then you should be able to activate it. All right, so let's turn off VoiceOver.
Voiceover off.
Thank you. Get everything set back up. All right, can everyone hear me again? Yay. That worked so much better. I was going to. All right, let's go back to this. Okay, so demo's done. So let's move on to lesson 3. You need to test in everything. So like we mentioned before, different screen readers will react differently within different browsers, different OSs. So it's really important to test as many as you possibly can. Everything is not probably going to be possible, but doing as many as you can is going to make sure that you're aware of all the issues that are out there, if there are common issues, what you can realistically break down. So we already know, for example, that with just standard testing, we need to make sure that our CSS looks the same in different browsers because all browsers are going to treat things slightly differently. Accessibility is the same way. So
What I would highly recommend is that you do not save all of your testing until the end, because that's how you identify a whole bunch of issues when you no longer have time to work on them. What I always recommend is perform small tests of your own work in different combinations just as you go. So as you're testing, say, all right, I'm going to check in Voiceover and do a couple of things in different browsers. And then as you can, switch over to another browser over other OS, just so you can identify issues as they come up, fix them on the fly before you've already invested time into it and then have to rebuild the entire thing. One thing to keep in mind is it's very helpful to also include other people's tests as you can. As the developer, I know how things are supposed to work. And so it's very easy for me to find workarounds about how to get it to work. And even though I'm trying to identify issues, mentally it's like, oh no, I was able to get it to work, so that's fine. It's really good to have somebody who doesn't know how it works, who doesn't know the expected behavior to go in. And so you can really see, how is an actual user going to interact with this? Does this make sense? And that's true for both usability overall and accessibility. So my process is that I will break down the different combinations I know I need to look at, whether it's going to be keyboard navigation, screen reader navigation, and we'll do small tests on the fly. Then as I finish components, we'll do some larger tests for the bigger pieces, note in the issues, and try to fix them as I can. And then I will do maybe a larger test before we actually call the project finished. So I do have a spreadsheet here. And I will say for most people, it's going to look very scary. For me, spreadsheets make a lot of sense. They may not make sense for you. So this is what works for me. Don't expect that you need to do something similar. But I do have a template available if people would like to use it. So let me share that tab. All right, so this here is an example of the type of spreadsheet that I would set up. I would have an ID where it's just an arbitrary name of issues as I find them, a description, what the status is, and how severe it is. Then over at the bottom, I have an occurrence list where I have, and this is the intimidating part, all the different combinations of things that I want to test, and then list whether or not a specific issue occurs. Now, again, you don't have to do something like this. This just makes sense for me to be able to go in and say where it's occurring, how often it seems to happen. And then that way I can then track, does there seem to be a commonality? Is it only occurring in this browser? Is it only occurring in this screen reader? Even then knowing sort of the base browsers that things are based off of, is something that's only happening in Chromium? Is this something that's only happening in Microsoft products? So you're welcome to copy this and use it as you need. But I also understand that that's just way too much because I really like making spreadsheets. And so for me, it works. All right, let's get back here. All right, lesson 4, create a system that works for you. So this section is going to be pretty vague, and that's because it has to be, because what works for every individual team is going to be completely different. So my team, for example, we very rarely actually build websites. Our duties are maintaining and developing on the overall platform, and then other people build the websites. So the sort of things that a website developer who's working on one specific site is going to need to test for is going to be different than what my team needs. We're going to be looking at templates and themes. We're not going to have individual pages. And so it's really important to acknowledge that the things you need to look at are going to change. There is not going to be a one-size-fits-all solution. And I would say stay away from anything that is labeling itself as such, especially, as I mentioned, checklists. I think that checklists are kind of a dangerous mindset to get in because it gives the impression that we're all testing the exact same thing, we all have the same needs, when that just isn't true. But also it gives this sort of impression that accessibility is one and done. You do it and then we're done. Great, forever. We never have to worry about it again. And that's not true. It's an iterative process. It's a thing that you need to continue to do throughout the life cycle of your product or your site because accessibility changes, technology changes, and therefore we have to adapt with it. So you're going to have to create something that works for you, whether it's a whole bunch of spreadsheets or a dartboard, whatever it is, something that's going to work for your team in your case. But also make sure that it is flexible, because again, things change. Your team is going to change. The products that you have are going to change. So if you tie yourself to a process and then are trying to finagle your work to fit into this process, well, the system isn't working for you. You are working to make the system work, and it should be as effortless as you can. So give yourself the freedom to adjust it as needed. So no, again, that was very vague. Here are kind of a breakdown of general concepts that I would recommend including. So as we mentioned, everyone should be doing small scale tests of their own work throughout the process. So spread it across different browsers, operating systems, screen readers to identify issues early on. And then as you're able to check each other's work, whether that's code reviews or manual tests as you can, just make sure that it is usable for other people besides yourself. Then do some larger scale tests as you have time and as components are finished, just to do a fuller, more broad test of the different sort of screen readers, browsers you're using. So that's when you start using the spreadsheet. Save that for the larger tests after a component is more or less finished. I will also say that there's nothing quite as helpful as a formal usability test. So actually having users come in, test it, show you the exact things that could be problematic. It's eye-opening and very humbling to have a product that you think is out the door, good to go, and then you have screen reader or have a usability test and it's just not working. And so it's a very valuable thing. If you can, I would highly recommend it. I would also say remove the idea of we'll get to it later. In accessibility, that phrase is the kiss of death. You will not get to it later. You will not be able to have time for it. Something else will come up. Do it now while you still have time, because it's very unlikely that you'll be able to get back to it. And again, this is not a one-off procedure. You're going to have to do this again and again and again. And that's just part of the process. And then there was a question in chat, can Google Analytics tell you how many visitors to your site are using screen readers? I do not believe so. There's kind of been a controversy within the accessibility community about whether browsers should be able to determine screen readers. And as of right now, the impression I've got is that no, that the concept is that it should be treated exactly the same, regardless of whether it's a screen reader or a standard user. So as far as I'm aware, no, there isn't a way to track it. All right, so then here's just an example workflow of what this could look like for an individual team. So for a development team, you might have ongoing tests during development, developers doing their own work, weekly code reviews, and then final tests of components as they're finished. You do a full usability test, and then put in final hotfixes for identified issues, and then you go to launch. With an operations team, it's going to be a little bit different because there may not be as much active development. It's going to be working on things as people report them. So you might have a weekly automated scan that will list out the issues. Then you go through a manual review of the flagged items, see what is actually an issue, what is a false positive, and then prioritize and assign them. Then it gets to a similar process: dev testing, code reviews, QA testing, and then production. So there are going to be some between them, but overall similar concepts. All right, lesson 5, share the work, share the load. So I want you to remove the phrase accessibility person from your vocabulary and never say it again. And the reason I say this is that if we treated accessibility like we treated security, you wouldn't lump all security work on one person and be like, okay, I'm doing my work, but Joe over there, he does all the security stuff. I don't need to worry about it. I can use whatever passwords I want, and I never have to sanitize everything. That would be an absolute nightmare for everyone involved. Your site would be so insecure, and Joe would probably leave your team because he couldn't handle it. Accessibility, like security, is something we're all responsible for. We all know that we have parts in it. We have to be able to test our own work and then be accountable for that. So question in chat. You recommend accessibility testing, but only one large usability test at the end. How can they can't be small, iterative, and one large at the end? I mean, I say that's how I recommend it, is so you do one final test at the end just to identify anything else that may have come up. A lot of it has to do with time, is that you may not have time to do a whole bunch of gigantic usability tests throughout the process, especially as it's still being worked on. So I say adjust for your team as needed. What I would generally recommend is that you do small iterative throughout the process, some larger scales in between, and then one final test to sort of confirm what is remaining. But so for your accessibility person, you can't just leave it to one person. That's how you get bottlenecks. That's how you get burnout, and overall how you end with a poor quality product. If you're relying on one person to do all the accessibility work, they're not going to get their own work done. And they're going to be so stressed that they're going to miss things. So everyone should have the ability to perform some basic tests of their own work. And you may not ever get to the level of being an expert or being the real accessibility person on your team, but being able to point out like, oh, I don't have the keyboard navigation working. This color contrast isn't sufficient. Being able to go over the basic stuff so that then your expert only needs to be brought in for more severe issues, things that are more complex. And that's also going to just mean that your team overall is going to be better. It's going to be stronger. You're going to be a better team and make better products. Lesson 6, involve people with disabilities. No, this one, it's not lesson 6 because it's not important. It's lesson 6 because all of the other ones flow together really well. But this is a very important step. So there's this concept of nothing with us without us, that we need to be including the people that we are designing for. And this is because we're really limited by our own experiences. For example, I conceptually can understand what it might be like to have visual impairment, how it could potentially affect my ability to interact with the world and the internet. I'll never really fully understand that. I'm never really going to be able to comprehend that because I've never had to deal with it. And so for me to design for somebody who has a visual impairment, who is living with this, is me saying that I can fully understand their experience or that I know better than them. And that's not true. I can't know someone's experience better than they can. And so we need to make sure that we are including people in the process who are actually going to be affected by the work that we do. Accessibility issues overall come down to the fact that the web doesn't really consider people with disabilities in the design process. So the issue isn't the user or anything with them, it's that they weren't considered, is that their needs weren't thought of. And we can't solve the problem by continuing to exclude people. So we have to make sure that we are including them in the process. And also to not include them is kind of patronizing. It's not a great feeling. So in terms of actually putting this into practice, this can mean a variety of things for your organization. It can mean outside hiring testing companies that specifically work with people with disabilities. It could mean making a concerted effort to hire people with disabilities. It could mean becoming more active in your local accessibility community to build relationships. All of these are really good things, but they do require time and effort and overall culture change. Because again, accessibility is not a checklist. It's a change in the way that we do things. It's a change in the way that we approach things and we think about things. And lastly, expect failure. This one is a little bit more of a pep talk than an exact testing rule, but bear with me. So accessibility is a really big field. There's always a lot to take in. The WCAG by itself is a huge document that can be really difficult to understand. But even as you learn, there's going to be more to learn. As technology changes, accessibility will change, the needs will change. And so there will never be a point at which you know everything. Because even if you did manage to memorize the WCAG back and forward, and I know some people that have done that, the fact is that accessibility isn't black and white. It can depend on people's circumstance. It can depend on who's using it. It can depend on the situation. And so what is considered accessible is a little ambiguous. So be open to the fact that you are going to be corrected. You are going to get things wrong. And so accept it now and learn to take it gracefully and take that feedback and move forward. And so for example, the reason that I kind of push so hard with the screen reader navigation is that this is something that I faced on early in my work at the U. And so I got a report about an accessibility issue regarding screen readers, and I thought I understood it. And so I did tab navigation, went through it, thought I'd figured out a fix. And then when I submitted to somebody to take a look at, my colleague and mentor, Phil Cragness, looked at it and was like, no, this is still super broken for screen readers, because I hadn't asked. I hadn't asked about the fact that most screen reader users do not use tabs. They use screen reader navigation. If I had asked from the beginning, gotten more clarification, I would have saved myself so much time, and I would have been able to resolve the issue much earlier on. So you're going to be proven wrong. People are going to challenge what you're saying, and that's part of the process. Also learn to ask for help when you need it. When you're over your head, it's okay to say, I don't know. But along with that, you are going to create something inaccessible. You are going to overlook something. You're going to mess up. That's human. Don't dwell on it. Learn from that to do better. All right, so that was all the lessons. Now we're going to have some time for some feelings. I know I said 7 lessons and resources. I know that we're getting close to the end, but humor me for a little bit. When I was making this session, it really reminded me that all the things that I've learned about accessibility, all the mistakes that I've made, a lot of it came down to one specific person who had helped me through my journey to being more accessible, becoming a better developer. And so I would like to dedicate this session in memory of Phil Cragness. Phil was a colleague of mine at the university who passed away in October of 2019. And he was so knowledgeable at accessibility, and he was a screen reader user who was just always happy to help you work through things, to give you encouragement. And he was one of the people who really inspired me to learn about accessibility, to want to be a better developer, and to begin championing for it. And he wasn't the only person who I learned from, but he made a direct impact. He made a specific contribution to why I am giving this session today. And so I want to dedicate this to him, but I also want to just let you know that accessibility can be really overwhelming. It can seem so scary and so big, and it can feel so lost. But I just want to let you know that what you do matters, the work you do matters, and you matter. And that even when it's hard, even when it's frustrating, any little effort you can do to make the world a better place does have an impact. So please do not stop pushing, because that is how change happens. All right, so feelings aside, resources. I'm going to go over these quickly because I know that we're short on time. So I have some general accessibility references here, including the official specs for both WCAG and ARIA. The Mozilla Developer Network also has some great resources in accessibility. WebAIM is a really great resource. They're the go-to if you're ever at a point when you're reading the WCAG and don't understand what it means. WebAIM will most likely have a breakdown for you. My home turf, University of Minnesota, has Accessible U, which is a great place to go to learn about various accessible topics. For screen reader references, we have the download links for both NVDA and JAWS, documentation for both VoiceOver and TalkBack, the WebAIM Screen Reader Survey for 2019, which is the most recent, and then also some cheat sheets from DeQ about how to use all of these screen readers. And they're in a very nice single-page printable format. They're really lovely. I highly recommend them. Some conference presentations that I've found really helpful. Helena McCabe at DrupalCamp Twin Cities 2016 gave resources on In Their Own Words, where she talks about the importance of including people with disabilities. Denise Berdrew from DeQ at Accessing Higher Ground gave a conversation about one size does not fit all and dismantling the idea of the average user. Phil Cragness gave a presentation on ARIA, which is a great introduction because ARIA is a whole another bag of worms. I did a presentation at University of Minnesota's World Usability Day 2017, going over intro to accessibility. I've learned a lot since then, so just know that there's always more to learn. And lastly, my testing spreadsheet, should you wish to use it. You feel free to copy it and adjust it as you need. All right, so it looks like we do have some time for questions. About 5 minutes if we can speed run them. All right, do we have any questions? Yes, so Luke asks, we sometimes have found that when we fix an issue with one particular screen reader, we inadvertently fix it or break it in another one. Can you describe when it's best to implement workarounds for bugs within specific screen readers versus documenting the issue exists and waiting for the screen reader vendor to fix the bug? So I particularly have found that as well. In general, what I have found is making things simpler tends to make it better. The more complex you try to do it, more complex you try to narrow down, like I need this to work in JAWS, tends to then make it worse for other screen readers. So stepping back, relying on native HTML5 wherever possible, that is going to simplify it. What I would say is that if it's only happening in one screen reader and maybe only a select subset of browsers, that's when you document it. If it's something where, if like on that spreadsheet, you're seeing a whole lot of red, you're seeing it happen in a whole lot of instances, that's where I would personally say that it needs to be something we fix. If it's something only in a couple of combinations, that's maybe something where you just document it, but it is more of a judgment call. How can I access slides to the presentation? I have a link that well, it's been posted, but there is a link that I will put up in a second. Is voice commands, Alexa, Siri, etc., something we should be testing for accessibility? I would personally probably say no. And feel free to correct me on this, just because I think in general, screen readers are going to be what people use more often, but that might change in the future. As the AI becomes smarter, it might be more common. So I would say probably, I wouldn't worry about it too much at this time. How do you turn on VoiceOver for iOS? I have Android, so I don't know off the top of my head, but in those cheat sheets, it should give you a walkthrough of how to do it. How do you prioritize or testing or accessibility fixes where you're at a deadline or crunch time? I would particularly look at the severity of the issue. So is it just the behavior is a little bit weird, or is it the entire thing is broken? So looking at how severe the issue is, and then along with where is it occurring? Again, if it's only in one combination, you can maybe try to push that off later. If it's across the board, that needs to be looked at. So it's a balancing act of how big of an issue is it in terms of user experience and how often is it occurring. Do you have any automated tools to recommend aside from the real world testing? I personally haven't used any. I know that ones people often use are SiteImprove, Pally, that's PA11Y, and Funnelback. I also know Dynalytics was the name of a company that was doing it using the Wave code base. I think they've turned into a company now. Those are the ones that I'm aware of off the top of my head. I do not have any personal experience with them. Question. We try to automate all of our testing. Do you see screen reader testing as something that may be automatable in the future? I'd say it's possible. Anything is possible, but I don't see an easy way to do that just because it's a complete user-based experience. But I'll never say never. It might be at some point in the future. What tools do you use for your small inline iterative testing? So I use a mixture of the Wave extension for Chrome, which will give you a list of WCAG violations. Then also we'll use AXE, so AXE, which is in your developer tools if you download it. And I'll use a combination of those because they'll pick up different things. I also have a few other ones. I have like an ARIA validator. I'll have a headings map. I have this one that will turn off all images on the page and only show you the alt text. Those are a few of the different ones that I use. Okay, we've got 1 minute left. So thank you so much, everybody. If you'd like to let me know how I did, you can maybe feedback at tinyurl.com/DrupalCon20-gen-feedback. Again, the slide deck is in chat. That is tinyurl.com/DrupalCon20-gen. My contact info is there if you'd like to follow up with me or have any additional questions. But we are at time. So thank you so much. It's a little bit of an out-of-body experience. I don't remember any of the presentation, but thank you so much. It was so great to have all of you here.